Creating functions that produce custom objects. In this nugget, we're going to go one step further with functions and talk about why objects can be such an important part of what a function produces. We'll look at how to create a customized output object within a function, how to attach properties to that custom object, and finally how to output that object to the pipeline. We'll then look at our pipeline function and change it to use custom objects. And finally, we'll look at one of the benefits of that, being able to format and reuse that custom object output right on the pipeline. We'll start by looking at why objects are such an important part of Windows PowerShell and how they're an important part of any function that you write as well. We'll do that by opening that function that we wrote in the previous nugget, ping host pipeline. Let's really think about what this is doing. We're getting a bunch of computer names and piping them to ping host. Ping host is pinging each one of them, and it's only outputting those which are successfully pinged. So we're then able to pipe that on to another commandlet to do something with the ones we connected to, but there's an intrinsic problem with what we've done here. We're assuming in this function that we only care about those computers which are pingable. What if that's not the case? What if we care, in a different circumstance, about the computers which are not pingable? Maybe we want to get a list of computer names which are not pingable so that we can send a wake on LAN packet to them, or so that we can produce a report of non-reachable servers. Maybe what we were trying to do is ping a list of web servers, and we really don't care about the ones which are reachable. That's good news. We want to know about the ones which are not reachable, the bad news, the things that we need to pay attention to and possibly fix. Well, as it sits, this ping host function won't allow us to do that because we're losing data. We're dropping the computer names that are not reachable. Now, obviously, we could fix that. We could just change this so that if the computer name is not pingable, it outputs the computer name. But that means every time we change our minds about how we want to use ping host, we have to go back in here and modify it. That's not really good because it limits the number of people we can share ping host with. If we share it with a less experienced administrator who might not be comfortable with scripting, they're not going to be able to go in and change this every time. Now, another option would be to just copy the whole thing to the clipboard, paste it, and create a second function, ping good host and ping bad host. Ping bad host will output the computer names which were not reachable. Ping good host will output those which do. Yeah, we could do that. That's kind of a lousy solution, though, because it gives us pretty much the exact same code in two different places. So if we ever modify this or need to maintain it, now we have to do it in two places. It would really be better if we could just get a single function to somehow output both the good and the bad computer names, and kind of flag them in a way, mark them so that we can tell which computer names coming out were reachable and which ones which were coming out were not reachable. In addition, there's other information from a ping that we should be able to get. We should be able to get the IP address that responded to the ping. We should be able to get the response time of the ping. Maybe some future use of this is to ping a bunch of computers and filter out those that had a fast response time because we want to do something with the ones that had a poor response time. Well, we can do all of those things. Let's come back to this function after we look at how to create custom output objects in Windows PowerShell. Let's talk about what our goals are going to be for this. We want to create an object of some kind that has a computer name property, a responding property, and that'll indicate true or false if it was pingable or not. We want to have an IP address property, and that'll be the IP address that it used to respond to the ping. And I'm guessing we want to have something like a response time property. If we can create a function which produces these objects, then we've got a really flexible thing that can be reused in many different circumstances. We pipe in a bunch of computer names, and these objects come out. That means we could choose to just keep those which were responding, or maybe we want to keep those which were not responding. Maybe we want to sort the output by response time, or only keep those where the response time was greater than some, previously determined threshold for us. The point is that by creating this rich object with all this information on it, we can change our mind about how we want to use it as our circumstances differ. So let's drop right into Windows PowerShell and see how to create a custom object. We'll start with a variable, obj. I'm going to use the new object commandlet to create a new PS object. This is sort of a blank canvas for us, an empty slate where we can do anything we want to. I then want to add properties to it. I do that by taking the variable and piping it to the add member commandlet. Now I need to tell it what type of property I'm going to add, and we're almost always going to add static information in what's called a note property. I need to give it a name, such as computer name, and I need to put a value in there. Right now we'll just put the local host value. I can repeat that to put additional properties, such as response time. We'll just give it a value of 100, such as IP address, and we'll put just a sample IP address. Oops. We'll use IP address and use 192.168.15.15. And now if we take obj and pipe it to get member, you can see that our object has got computer name, IP address, and response time properties. If we just look at obj, because it has 4 or fewer properties, they're automatically formatted as a table for us. So the real trick is to go inside of our function, and instead of having it output a simple true or false, or instead of having it simply output a computer name, have it construct a custom object like this, and for each computer name that comes in, output one of these custom objects. And so that's what we'll do. Let's close the shell and go back to our script editor, and we're going to open that pipeline function we had before. Here's where we were writing out the computer name if it was pingable, and we weren't doing anything if it was not pingable. So let's step back just a bit up here. We're going to create a new object. Now let's attach the computer name. Obj, pipe to add member. We're going to add a note property named computer, and attach the current pipeline object, which contains our computer name. Let's do this again. Add member. This time we'll add the response time, which is a note property. That does need to come first. And we'll get the response time from our WMI results variable. Wait, how did we know that was there? Well, let's go to our favorite search engine and look at the documentation for the Win32 ping status class. And if you browse through at the list here, you'll see that we've got things like response time to live, protocol address. That's the next one we're going to use. If we scroll down and actually look at protocol address, it says the address that the destination used to reply. So this is where you would find that information, again, just by reading the documentation on the WMI class. So let's go ahead and add that last one there. Obj, pipe to add member, adding a note property called IP address, and it's going to be results.protocol address. The last thing we need to add is our responding or not. And that's going to be different based on whether or not the computer responded. So if it did respond, we'll pipe obj to add member to add a note property called responding and put true. Let's copy that to the clipboard. We'll paste it down here because if it didn't respond, we're going to add the same property with a value of false instead. Okay, so we're almost done. Let's actually change this around, our command here at the bottom, so that we're just seeing the output. That way we can sort of see what's going on before we try to use it for anything else. We'll save this. And then run it. Okay, we got no output. Well, we've created a custom object, but at no point did we ever output that to the pipeline. Oops. So here at the end of the process script block, we simply need to write output our custom object variable. That'll get it out to the pipeline. Now let's see what happens when we run this. Great, we got a response time of 0. We see that there's an IPv6 address and it's responding. This is great. We've got a ton of extra information in here now that we can work with. So that's really how to build a pipeline function the PowerShell way. Never output simple text like a computer name or a simple value like true or false. Always output a rich object that has all of the different information you think you might ever need. Because honestly, if you ever realize that there's a piece of information missing, it's easy enough just to come back and add another one of these lines to add that piece of information to what this function is outputting. But by outputting a lot of information, you allow this to be used in a lot of different ways. In fact, let's look at some of those ways right now. We're going to start with this basic get content of the computer names, and then we're going to pipe them to ping host. Now, for the first example, let's only keep the ones where the responding property is true, and then let's only keep the computer property from that. So there's 4 properties on the objects that come out of here. We're going to keep the ones that had a responding property of true and get rid of everything except the computer property. So when we run that, we get the same list of computer names that we got when we wrote this function originally. That means we haven't removed our capability for this function to say, for each object, pipe to get WMyObject Win32 operating system from the computer contained in our pipeline inputs computer property. So we've still retained that capability. Modifying our function hasn't taken away our ability to use it for this purpose. But to back up one, we might want to say, let's only keep the ones where it's not responding. Now let's run it again. This time only one computer name comes out, the one which was not responding. If this had been a list of server names, for example, then this list of not responding server names is our to-do list. This is our action list. These are the problems. We didn't have to make any changes to our function in order to enable this use of its information. Let's close this and take another one. Let's take the results and sort them on response time. Run it again. And this time we get all of our computers back ordered by response time. Not available didn't have a response time, so it shows up at the top of the list, well, possibly as a problem. So the idea is to get as much information into these objects as possible so that the output of your function can be used in a wide range of different purposes without having to actually modify what the function does. The function is providing rich information that can be manipulated in the pipeline. It could, for example, let's say we just want to select the response time and computer properties and export that to a CSV file. We can do that. After the script runs, we'll just take a look at what's in cresponsetimes.csv. This is something we could maybe pull into an Excel spreadsheet. Maybe this is something we do with all of our servers at various times through the day. Maybe once every half hour, maybe once every 10 minutes. Pull all that information into Excel afterwards and draw a chart of how our server response times change over the day. And that's yet another use case that's enabled by the same ping host function, just adding on some other built-in PowerShell functionality. Again, by creating rich output objects and combining that output with some of what else PowerShell can do, you can enable a bunch of different use cases and do a bunch of different things in your environment without ever having to go back and modify that function. And this also illustrates a nice workflow in creating a function. I usually do start out creating my functions as nice, simple, parameterized, one object at a time functions. That lets me get the core code, stuff like this WMI query and checking the status code. It lets me get that working correctly. Once I sort of know what's going on under the hood and how everything's working, I start to convert things into a pipeline function. When I'm done, almost all of my functions wind up being these pipeline functions because they offer the most reuse of that code. In this nugget, we looked at how to create and output custom objects from a function. We started by looking at why objects are so important in Windows PowerShell, and we saw how to create a custom object inside of a function. We attached properties to that object, and then we output it to the pipeline so that it could be used downstream by other commands. We converted our pipeline function to use those custom objects as its output, creating a much more flexible, much more robust, much richer overall function that can be reused in a lot of different situations. Finally, we saw an example of some of those different situations, formatting and reusing that custom object output right on the command line. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.